America no longer has the luxury, if you want to call it that, of ignoring racial division, because America is changing. The economic future of the children of white Americans will depend increasingly on the talents of non-white Americans.
Former U.S. Senator and Basketball Hall of Famer Bill Bradley, today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. 25 years ago, a lot of people thought that Bill Bradley was going to be our next president. I mean, after all, he'd been 20 years a United States Senator from the state of New Jersey. But that followed a 10-year NBA career that saw him enter the Hall of Fame. And Bill Bradley was also an Olympic gold medalist, a Rhodes Scholar, a military veteran. The only thing he didn't have was the backing of the powerful Democratic establishment. That belonged to Al Gore. Now, in 2000, Bill Bradley gave Al Gore a pretty good run for his money for the Democratic nomination. But ultimately, after defeats in Iowa and New Hampshire and on Super Tuesday, Bradley bowed out and endorsed Gore. Now, just a few months later, as the Bush-Gore race was heating up, Bill Bradley wrote a book called The Journey from Here. And he and I met that fall to talk about it. In fact, the day we met, it was just a few hours before the first Al Gore-George W. Bush debate. So in just a moment, my conversation with Bill Bradley.
It was a much more innocent time when this interview was recorded. It's from radio personality Bill Thompson's Deep Archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2000, Bill Bradley.
Well, I really wrote it for three reasons, Bill. One is I wanted to give voters a context for making their decision in November for who they vote for President of the United States by laying out issues that I thought the next president would have to address if he were going to be a leader, a true leader. Second, I wrote it because I wanted to say thank you to the millions of Americans who supported me in my run for the presidency. And I wanted to give them something tangible that they could use to answer the question that they might be asked, well, what was that Bradley campaign in 2000 all about? And third, I wrote it so that it could be a beginning of an agenda for whoever's the next president of the United States. In terms of looking at health care, we still have 45 million people without health insurance. In terms of looking at child poverty, still 13 million children who live in poverty. The need for a more responsible and accountable education system for our children. The need to heal the racial divide in America, keep our economy moving forward with more people on the prosperity train, reform our democracy, particularly campaign finance reform, and clearly define our role in the world and lead in a new way.
It did occur to me as I was reading your book, had you published this 1 year ago, and if it had received a wide audience, that could be you up there in Boston tonight against George W., and maybe that would have been you at the convention giving Ernestine a big smooch in front of the cameras. I mean, maybe your timing was just a little bit late with this?
Well, the point is that I wrote it out of the experience of the campaign, as well as out of things I'd thought about for a number of years. And it was also a way for me to come to terms with the experience. I wrote this between middle of March and the middle of August.
Maybe we should require all our candidates to do something like this. This is a very concise and very meaningful representation of what you believe in.
It's very true. And it is distilled from a lot of life experience and a lot of public experience.
What happens then between this, with this very thoughtful book that really will make every reader of it stop and think and really assess the way they live their lives? What gets lost between this and those little 30-second sound bites or 10-second sound bites? What is the campaign missing?
Well, this is a small book, but if you read it, you're at least engaged with me for several hours. But if you're sitting in your living room, you're engaged with me for 30 seconds on TV. And I think that what's missing is an extended dialogue with the person who's running for office, because life is fragmented. You don't see a lot of things because you're doing your work, and you can't watch everything, and suddenly you see a snippet, and that's your impression. So I think that it's partly the way we live our lives. I think it's partly the way politics works today. It's partly the way the media works today that lead to really people making decisions not based upon an extended conversation with a candidate, but based on a few impressions.
Because my impression as I was reading your book, again, was that many people who may have in the primaries voted for Mr. Gore, who's a fine man, a fine candidate, may make a very good president, might have otherwise voted for you if they'd known all the stuff that's in this book.
Well, many of the chapters in this book were speeches that I gave, not the exact words, but the themes were speeches: health, education, race, campaign finance reform. And the problem is that when you give the speech, the press never reports the speech. They maybe put a quote from the speech.
Because they've heard it. They've heard it as often as you have.
And so campaigns result in being essentially performances for the press, where every day you have to have a different press release, emphasizing something different, and your staff tries to spin the press to write it the way you want, and then tries to spin the press about how bad your opponent is. So the press is passive, essentially, sitting in the middle, being bombarded by both sides, and picking and choosing like they're selecting food from a smorgasbord.
Which sometimes is what it resembles, too. But you speak so movingly and so eloquently in your book about looking at people's faces out on the campaign trail, not the press, but the ordinary people, the voters, the people you're trying to get through to.
Well, my campaign was based upon two premises. One was that we're living at a time of unprecedented prosperity in America that allows us to do some things that we couldn't when we were in the politics of deficits. We're in the politics of surpluses now, politics of plenty, so that we can now invest in the health, education, and welfare of our people, which, if we do, will make us all stronger in the long run. The second premise of the campaign was it was an unabashed appeal to idealism, the thought that good can triumph over bad, that principle can defeat expediency, that you don't have to give up your idealism to be successful in America. And so I fought the campaign on those bases because I thought that was what the country deserved at this time.
Has it made you any more cynical that didn't work?
No, it didn't. I think, if anything, I could have done it better. I think there are other aspects of the campaign you can't predict. I was up against entrenched power. You never realize what an establishment is until you're running against it on multiple levels. And I think that there also is the unknown that occurs. I mean, for example, 20% of the voters in New Hampshire said that health was a consideration of their vote. And in late December of '99, I had heart fibrillation, which was not serious, but was blown out of proportion by the press. And even yesterday, I was on a radio program, call-in show, and a lady called in from Dubuque, Iowa. The two races were Iowa and New Hampshire at the beginning, so I spent a lot of time in both states. And she said, as many people walk up to me and say, well, how's your health? My health was always good. So you can never predict what's going to happen out there. And, I made some tactical mistakes as well.
Do you suppose they're asking Dick Cheney these days how his health is?
Well, that's another real irony.
You should have been campaigning next to Dick Cheney.
There were coverage here for, weeks. And Cheney was a one-day story.
Yeah.
And he had 3 heart bypasses.
Yeah.
I don't have anything wrong with my heart. I have an electrical problem.
Now, Mr. Gore said on Larry King last week that he said, if I'm not paraphrasing him incorrectly, he said the first thing he would do as chief executive is to enact campaign finance reform. Is that something is that something you think the American people really want?
Well, he said the first thing he would do would be send a bill to Congress.
Right.
That's a long way from enacting it.
True.
If you're going to enact campaign finance reform, you need to use a lot of your political chits, and a president does have a lot of political chits, call them in order to get the Congress to support this. The question is, will he do that? He might send the bill, number one bill, to Congress, but will he spend the political capital necessary to get it passed? That's really an unknown at this time.
After this short break, More from Bill Bradley on what went wrong in 2000.
You know, AI is not just for 22-year-old coders. A lot of us older adults are drawing on our life experience to find unique and creative ways to use AI, at home or at work. Got an AI success story you'd like to share? Tap the link below to visit our YouTube channel, AI After 40, and let's keep learning together.
Now back to my 2000 conversation with Bill Bradley.
Well, so many of the ideas that you're talking about in here will require the spending of some political capital, won't they?
They certainly will. I mean, for example, you don't convince the Congress and the Washington lobbying establishment that we simply, as a nation, as prosperous as we are now, must see that 45 million people who don't have health insurance actually get health insurance. A lot of different ways you can do that. I'm not arguing about the method or the form or the program, but what I am arguing is that it's a moral imperative to do it. People say 45 million people. Well, how much is 45 million people? It's abstract to us until you make it a little more concrete by pointing out that 45 million people are more than all of the people living in the following states combined: Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South and North Dakota, Montana, and Colorado. Now, what if we said we don't care that all the people in those states didn't have health insurance? Would we turn our backs on them? No. But in effect, that's what we're doing, because the 45 million are not concentrated in 12 states. They're dispersed over the nation as a whole. And so we can turn our back. Well, the next president, if he's going to lead on an issue critical to the health of the American people and to the health of the country generally, because sick workers are not productive workers, sick parents are not the best parents. So you end up with having the need to have a president address this, and that will take a use of political capital. Take 13 million children living in poverty. That's, again, a number. How much is 13 million? If all the 13 million children were located in one place in America, it would be bigger than the city of New York. And then we couldn't avert our eyes and pretend that they didn't exist. So the next president's going to have to call attention to that on a regular basis, because we all go on about our life, and each of us is working hard and trying to support our families, and we each have our interests, and we are involved with our community often, but we don't always see these large national issues, which if we, how many of us would turn our back on a starving child? Mm-hmm. None of us would.
But as you say in the book, a few years from now, we will look back and say that, well, of course we should have done this.
Well, that's the point. The book is called The Journey from Here, but it initially had a title, Common Sense. Then I realized, well, that title's been used before. And even though the copyright has ended, I thought maybe I shouldn't do that. But in the first chapter of the book, I talk about how much what I've just said and would say is common sense. And I do it historically. I mean, think back to a time when, there was slavery. Well, we ended slavery. Think to a time where women couldn't have a right to vote. We gave them the right to vote. Think to a time where there was no public school system in America. We built the public school system. Think of a time where there was no Social Security system in America. We passed Social Security. Think when there was no Medicare in the country. We passed Medicare. Think of all the rivers and skies that were polluted by the worst kind of pollutants. They're clean now. And each one of those things, we look back and say, well, of course women should have a right to vote. Of course there should be a public school system and the elderly should have a pension. It's just common sense. And my point is, 10 years from now, we'll look back at the things I write about in this book, if we have leadership, and say, well, that was just common sense that everybody in America have health insurance, that there be no children in poverty. are that we reform our campaign finance laws so that money stops dominating the process as much as it does today.
The only thing is that there are large numbers of people who, in their minds, think, of course we shouldn't have affirmative action. Of course we should not allow women to kill their unborn babies.
Well, I think that people can disagree on these issues. And I think that in terms of race, it is a legal argument. I mean, it's a legal issue, no question about that. Affirmative action is an aspect of that. It's forcing discrimination laws, anti-hate crime laws, making access to capital, reforming the criminal justice system. All those things are important. But race is also a matter of the heart, and that is being able to see someone for who they are, not for the color of their skin, their eye shape. I point out that America no longer has the luxury, if you want to call it that, of ignoring racial division, because America is changing. There are more Muslims in America today than there are Presbyterians. 1/3 of all the startups in the high-tech central Silicon Valley of California were started by entrepreneurs of Asian ancestry. And the Latino population in America will be the majority in some states by 2040 and will be by far the largest minority in the overall United States. You look at these numbers and you say, well, it's self-evident. We're going to have to all work together, live together, respect each other, make sure that all of our skills are used. Because if you just take these figures, I mean, less than 60% of the people who enter the workforce in the year 2000 are going to be native-born white Americans. And that means, if labor economics means anything, that the economic future of the children of white Americans will depend increasingly on the talents of non-white Americans. And that's not ideology, that's demographics. And if we fail to address it, then those who are productive, instead of having everybody be productive, will be carrying a bigger and bigger burden on their backs for those who are not productive. And I don't think we have that luxury in a world that's more and more competitive at a time of tremendous economic change because of technology and globalization.
Well, let me ask you, in the moments or so that we have left, what is your role in the next 4 years?
Well, I'm going to continue to be guided by my values. My campaign, as I said, was an unabashed appeal to idealism. I mean, my values were, I want living standards to rise, racial divisions to heal. I want each of us to understand how much better we are than we think we can be, and that there's goodness in each of us. So I'll find some way to do that. I'm probably headed toward the private sector, and so if I was in the public sector to change the world, I'm going to do the same thing in the private sector. And always keep my hands not only in the private sector, but also in the nonprofit sector, and possibly some public service down the road. But that's not my immediate question. My immediate question is how to serve in different ways.
And if all else fails, there might be some NBA coaching vacancies.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'd be glad to do that for the average salary. I mean, I certainly would be willing to go back and play for the average salary. When I came into the league, the average salary was $9,500. Now it's about $2 million. My wife says I was born too soon. I said, well, no, I wouldn't have met you, so I wasn't born too soon.
Bill Bradley is 82 now. He has a weekly radio show on Sirius Satellite Radio. Now you can get your copy of The Journey from Here by Bill Bradley by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 1992 interview with Al Gore.
We don't take care with the environment. We assume that we're somehow separate from nature, when actually the message is now beginning to get through that what we do to the Earth's environment, we do to ourselves.
And my 1998 conversation with another unsuccessful presidential candidate who then wrote a book, Bob Dole.
People say, why didn't you do this in 96? Well, you've done more this election, I'd have voted for you. If you'd made the Visa commercial before the election, I'd have voted for you.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, Robert McNeil may be best known as half of the McNeil-Lehrer Report, but he was also a master of the English language and a student of the English language. So next time, my 2005 conversation, you'd think I could learn to talk better. My 2005 conversation with Robert McNeil.
Linguists believe that dialects are clung to because people want it as a marker of their identity, who they are, where they come from, where they belong.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.